The soft sunlight filtered into a corner of the luxurious residential area where the spacious Parker house was located, in the beta suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Melissa Parker was ironing her daughter Katie's school uniform. "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to be a doctor," said the little girl with a smile as she played with her stethoscope and examined her stuffed animals on the living room sofa. Melissa returned the smile warmly. She had once been a successful accounting manager at a large corporation. She was excellent with numbers, and her colleagues trusted her completely. But when Katie started having health problems at age 6, she decided to pause her career. Now she worked part-time in administration and stayed active in her Presbyterian church. She woke up at 5 a.m. for prayer time and relied deeply on her husband David while she dedicated herself completely to the care of her daughter. David Parker was head of research and development at Global Pharmaceuticals and, as a senior executive, led innovative projects for the development of new medications and earned $0.000,000 a year. The neighbors saw him as the ideal husband and father. He always found time to play baseball with Katie in the park during vacations, and his attentive attitude at Sunday sermons had made him a role model within the church. Katie, the family's treasure, was in 4th grade at St. Mary's Elementary School. Despite her health problems, which sometimes prevented her from attending classes, she was a bright girl, loved by everyone. She had the firm dream of becoming a doctor to help other sick children. She deeply admired her father, trusted her mother blindly, and had a kind heart. She always remembered her classmates' birthdays and had the habit of making handmade cards for them. Dr. Roberts, the family's physician, was an experienced pediatric surgeon with 30 years of experience at St. Mary's General Hospital, renowned for his impeccable ethics. He also participated in Christian medical missions and organized Christmas charity events at the hospital. His kind character had earned him the affection of the children, who affectionately called him Uncle Robbie. The Parkers were well regarded in the community as a devout Christian family who regularly attended church. Thanks to David's income, they lived comfortably in a 4-bedroom house in the exclusive Beta district and valued every moment together. During the holidays, the spacious kitchen always smelled of homemade cookies, and family photos adorned the mantelpiece above the fireplace in the living room. The Parkers participated in the church's community activities every Sunday and valued holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas, seeing them as special moments to strengthen family ties. Melissa and Katie had their little tradition of stopping by the local Starbucks. Melissa ordered her organic coffee while Katie enjoyed a hot chocolate, sharing precious mother-daughter moments on their way home. They also used to go to the farmer's market to buy fresh vegetables, and as a gesture of kindness, they shared some with their elderly neighbors, who always appreciated the gesture. At Whole Foods Market, Melissa carefully chose the ingredients, prioritizing options with few additives to ensure that her family ate a healthy diet. On holidays, the whole family sometimes visited the Mall of America. Katie loved going to the medical books section in the bookstore. Her eyes would light up with excitement as she said, "When I can read these books, I'll be able to help sick children." Her parents listened to her tenderly, supporting her dream with love. One afternoon, Melissa was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The sound of the knife cutting the fresh vegetables echoed in the air. A normal weekday at 6 p.m., but that peaceful routine was about to be broken in an instant. Her eyes fell on Katie, who suddenly collapsed in the living room. Her homework notebook was scattered on the floor, pencils rolled across the carpet. "Katie!" Melissa ran to her and touched her forehead. She was pale, covered in cold sweat, and breathing with difficulty. With trembling hands, Melissa called an ambulance. As soon as she hung up, she dialed her husband, David. Katie fainted. "We're on our way to St. Mary's." David's voice sounded agitated on the other end of the line. "Wait, take her to my company's affiliated hospital. But this is the closest." "Do it," he ordered urgently. The doorbell rang. The paramedics had arrived. "She has a high fever. We need to transport her immediately," said an experienced paramedic calmly. "Katie," Melissa whispered weakly as they lifted her onto the stretcher. "Mommy, I'm scared." Melissa took her hand and forced a smile. "Everything will be all right, my love. Mommy is here with you." The ambulance siren broke the silence of the quiet residential area. Melissa, with a heavy heart, prayed ceaselessly. Lord, please protect my daughter. In the emergency room of St. Mary's General Hospital, Dr. Roberts began treatment immediately. She has severe abdominal pain. We need a CT scan. Now, he ordered firmly. The nurses mobilized efficiently. At that moment, David arrived at the hospital in a hurry, but something in his attitude was strange. We have to transfer her to another hospital, he said, agitated. Dr. Roberts interrupted him firmly. Mr. Parker, your daughter's condition is critical. There is no time to move her. David was visibly nervous. His usual composure had vanished, and beads of sweat. We immediately suspect acute peritonitis. It's a race against time. On the way to the operating room, Katie looked at her mother with concern. Mom, do you think I can still be a doctor? Melissa smiled tenderly, holding back tears. Of course, my love. You're going to be a great doctor. The operating room doors closed, leaving an unbearable tension in the air. Even Dr. Roberts, normally serene, reflected deep concern. 30 minutes later, the operating room door burst open. Stop the surgery. David had barged into the operating room, wearing street shoes, completely unlike his usual serene demeanor. As head of the department, this is an operating room. Get out immediately. Dr. Roberts snapped severely. But it was too late. On the screen, a strange object appeared in the image. David froze. The whole room fell into a heavy silence. This looks like a monitoring chip for human experiments, said Dr. Roberts in a controlled voice, breaking the tension of the moment. The medical team began to meticulously document the evidence, the size, location, and shape of the strange object. Every detail would soon reveal a terrifying truth. The hospital ethics committee was convened urgently, and the possibility of involving the police was on the table. Outside the operating room, Melissa slumped against the wall, feeling the world around her crumble. 48 hours after the surgery, the joint investigation between the hospital ethics committee and the police was about to begin. In the conference room of St. Mary's General Hospital, the morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating several evidence bags on the table. This chip is quite advanced technology, commented Detective Murphy of the Criminal Investigation Division, examining the small metallic piece that emitted a faint cold glow. Dr. Roberts sighed deeply. It's a device designed for human experimentation. In my 30 years of experience, I've never seen anything like it. Is there any connection with pharmaceutical companies? Murphy asked. We are investigating that possibility. The chip's serial number suggests a link to the R&D department at LivTech, the doctor replied seriously. In another room at the hospital, Melissa couldn't hold back the tears. Sarah, the head nurse, held her shoulders gently. I can't believe it. David would actually do something like this. With trembling hands, Melissa grabbed a photo of Katie asleep in her hospital room. The surgery had been successful, and her daughter was stable, but the pain in her chest didn't go away. She knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. The police investigation progressed at a surprising speed. A search was carried out at LivTech, and interrogations were conducted with R&D personnel. One after another, terrifying facts began to emerge. From the testimonies of David's subordinates, Director Parker desperately tried to hide the failure of the new drug development project, stated Jessica, a young researcher, with tears in her eyes. The pressure to reduce costs was brutal. We were told that without human test data, we couldn't continue with development. Meanwhile, Melissa had started her own investigation. Searching her husband's study, she found a hidden USB drive. Her heart raced as she opened the files, detailed records of changes in Katie's condition, as if her daughter had been treated as a test subject. That night, Melissa knelt in the church prayer room, her soul in pieces. Lord, help me. Tell me what to do, she whispered, eyes filled with tears. Pastor Mel silently put a hand on her shoulder. You're a strong mother, Melissa. God will show you the way. Meanwhile, at LivTech headquarters, an emergency board meeting was taking place. Richardson, David's superior and head of R&D, looked at him with contained fury. Why did you take such a dangerous risk? David had no answer. All that remained was to face the consequences. The company's reputation was on the verge of collapse. However, behind those words of concern, there was a hint of panic. Richardson was not only trying to save the company but also to hide his own involvement. But the worst was yet to be revealed. During the investigation, it was discovered that Katie was not the only one. At least 5 other children had similar chips implanted in their bodies, all of whom had presented unexplained health problems. "This is going to explode," Detective Murphy said to the public relations officer, who was preparing for the press conference. "It could become the biggest scandal in the pharmaceutical industry." In a corner of the interrogation room, David slumped in his seat, shoulders drooping. The image of the confident and respected man he once was had completely disappeared. "Why did you put that chip in your own daughter?" the detective asked coldly. David swallowed hard. His trembling voice barely managed to come out. "The research was everything to me." "Explain yourself better," the detective insisted. David lowered his head. "With the constant failures in the development of new drugs and the budget about to be cut, my subordinates were at risk of losing their jobs. We just needed the data. If the clinical trials had been successful." From the monitoring room, Melissa heard her husband's confession. She had no tears left, only an immense emptiness that spread within her. "Mom, when is Dad coming home?" Katie asked from her hospital bed. Melissa remained silent every time. She couldn't find the courage to tell the truth to those innocent eyes. The investigation continued to uncover more atrocities. One by one, LivTech executives were exposed, turning the case into a scandal that rocked the medical world. It was discovered that illegal human experiments had been carried out systematically for years. The Medical Association convened an emergency meeting to discuss sanctions against those involved. Many of those who had cooperated with the chip implantation surgeries had done so in exchange for funding for their research. "The credibility of our industry has been seriously damaged," declared the president of the Medical Association with a stern face. "But we must take this as an opportunity to rethink our medical ethics from the ground up." The media wouldn't stop talking about the case. Every day, new headlines came out. A daughter used as a test subject in human acts of a pharmaceutical company. Melissa couldn't bear to watch the news, but inside her, a new determination began to be born. She wasn't going to let it all end as a simple tragedy. The darkness within the medical world had to come to light. Someone had to make sure these mistakes never happened again. "Katie, your dream is going to come true," Melissa whispered, stroking her sleeping daughter's cheek. "But before that, Mom has something to do." 6 months later, the day of the trial finally arrived. The courtroom was packed with reporters, medical professionals, and representatives from the pharmaceutical industry. In the front row were members of Melissa's church. Pastor Michael prayed silently. Judge Sarah Watson, with 30 years of experience in medical litigation, entered the room. Prosecutor James Morrison stood up and began his opening statement in a firm voice. The defendant, David Parker, subjected 6 children, including his own daughter, to illegal human. A murmur of indignation ran through the room. High-resolution images appeared on the screen, scars on the children's bodies where the chips had been implanted. In the gallery, some people began to sob. This was not just an illegal experiment, the prosecutor continued, raising his voice. This was an act of selling a child for money. David remained motionless in the defendant's box, his head bowed. Any vestige of his former dignity as head of R&D had completely disappeared. The first witness took the stand. "Dr. Roberts, when I discovered the chip..." He paused, took a deep breath, and shook his head. "I was deeply shocked. As a doctor, in my 30 years of experience, I had never seen anything like it." The trial was just beginning, but the truth had already come to light. "I had never witnessed such an inhuman act." Afterward, former LivTech researchers took the stand. Their testimonies brought to light the magnitude of the corporate crime, pressure for budget cuts, orders to fabricate data, and the cover-up of illegal experiments. Everything had been done in the name of profit. "We needed human trial data to develop new drugs," testified Tom, a former researcher. his voice trembling. But proper clinical trials took too long. That's when Director Parker. During the lunch break, Melissa sighed deeply as she looked out the hallway window. Other mothers of affected children approached her. Our children went through the same thing. Without saying more, they hugged and cried together. The pain they shared had forged an unbreakable bond between them. In the afternoon, it was time for Melissa's testimony. Until that day, I deeply trusted my husband. She began in a trembling voice, but with a firm gaze. I believed he was a man who prayed in church and valued his family. From the stand, she saw Katie crying in the courtroom. She clenched her fists with determination. I want to reveal the whole truth about this case so that never again will a child be used as a test subject. Finally, it was David's turn. He was the last witness. Until that moment, he had remained silent. He took a deep breath and, in a broken voice, began to speak. My obsession with completing the research clouded my judgment. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and swallowed. I believed that developing new drugs would save lives. But that's just an excuse. I hurt my own daughter. I failed as a father and as a human being. His words plunged the room into absolute silence. For the first time, Melissa sensed her husband's genuine remorse. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was even more crowded. I sentenced the defendant, David Parker, to 7 years in prison. The judge's voice resonated firmly. In addition, I order him to pay a total of $50 million in compensation to the victims. After the trial, Melissa spoke at the press conference. Her voice was clear and determined. I don't want this verdict to be an end, but a new beginning. The families of the victims have decided to create an organization to protect medical ethics. Her words were reported by media outlets across the country. A great change was about to begin in the medical world. Days later, Melissa and Katie went to visit David in prison. "Dad," Katie whispered, her voice choked. David looked up, and for the first time, real tears rolled down his face. "Katie, I'm so sorry." Melissa looked at him seriously. "Your crime is serious," she said quietly. "But I believe that showing Katie your true repentance and rehabilitating yourself will be for her future." Watching him being escorted back to his cell, Melissa reaffirmed her determination. She was not going to allow this case to be forgotten. Restoring true ethics in the medical world. "Katie, your dream will come true." Katie squeezed her mother's hand. "I still want to be a doctor." Melissa smiled and nodded firmly. "Yes, and I'm sure you'll be a great doctor." This was not the end. It was the beginning of something new, a new fight. 1 week after the verdict, Melissa organized the first meeting of the Association of Families of Victims. Families from all over the United States gathered to begin a crucial mission, establishing new standards for medical ethics. At the same time, at St. Mary's Hospital, a new ethics committee was created under the direction of Dr. Roberts, with the aim of strengthening the protection of patients' rights. Justice had been served. Yes, but this was not the end. It was just the beginning of a new battle for a better future in medicine. Melissa and the others were ready to keep fighting. 7 years later, the morning light filtered through the windows of the auditorium at the University of Minnesota Medical School. On the podium, the title of the lecture was read, "Medical Ethics and the Challenges of Human Rights in Modern Medicine." Melissa Parker addressed the audience with a firm voice, full of conviction. "My experience taught me what the medical world really needs to protect the rights of patients. This is not just a slogan, it's a commitment that we must all assume." Among the audience, a young doctor dressed in a white coat listened attentively. It was Katie Parker. She had advanced rapidly in her education, skipping grades to enter medical school at 17. Now, at 24, she was a resident in pediatrics and was already beginning to stand out as a promising young doctor. After the lecture, mother and daughter shared lunch in the hospital cafeteria. "Mom, your lecture was amazing." "Thank you, honey. But there's still a lot to do," Melissa replied with a smile. For 7 years, she had been traveling all over the United States as a representative of the Association for the Protection of Patient Rights. Her fight had become her life's purpose. Oh, by the way, Katie said, remembering something. Dad is going to be an instructor in the prison's R&D program. Melissa looked at her, surprised. Really? Katie nodded. During his time in prison, he studied medical ethics and even got a doctorate. Now he wants to teach young researchers about the importance of ethics, using his own mistakes as an example. Melissa looked out the window, reflecting. Many things had changed since that incident. And it was true. The medical world had undergone a radical transformation after that scandal. Strict regulations were established in the pharmaceutical industry. All clinical trial data began to be monitored by independent organizations, and systems were implemented to protect patients' rights. The lives of everyone involved had also changed drastically. Livtech's CEO had been sentenced to 12 years in prison and was still serving his sentence. The head of R&D received 10 years and, after his release, dedicated himself to community service. Other executives were sentenced to between 5 and 8 years. Livtech itself declared bankruptcy due to the multi-million-dollar compensation payments to the victims. This led to a massive restructuring in the pharmaceutical industry. However, amidst all those changes, one certainty remained. The fight for medical ethics and the protection of patients had to continue. And Melissa was ready to keep moving forward. A new beginning. Many of the doctors involved permanently lost their licenses, and some were even sentenced to prison. Their downfall left a profound lesson for the entire medical community. However, perhaps the person who had changed the most in those 7 years was Melissa herself. She founded the Association of Families of Victims, which expanded throughout the United States. She traveled the country giving lectures and appeared on television as one of the leading advocates for medical ethics. Thanks to her tireless work, new legislation began to advance in Congress. Finally, the Melissa Parker Act was passed, which significantly strengthened the protection of patients' rights and raised ethical standards in medical research. With its enactment, illegal human experimentation became strictly regulated. That night, Melissa visited the prison. "Next week, you're free," she said, looking at David through the glass of the visiting room. 7 years had transformed not only his appearance, but also his inner self. "Yes, but I feel like my atonement is just beginning," David replied, his voice completely different, without a trace of his former arrogance. "I'm really proud that Katie has become a doctor. She chose a different path than mine." "Yes, and she will be a great doctor," Melissa whispered, "one who truly understands her patients." That night, upon returning home, Melissa opened an old journal in her study. She had started it 7 years ago. Its pages held her struggles, her hopes, and the determination that had brought her to that moment. On the cover, it read, "What I found after losing a loved one, a testimony on medicine and human rights." The following month, that journal would be published as a book. It would tell the story of a mother's pain and the hope that arose from it. A future to build. On the weekend, Melissa and Katie stopped at Starbucks. "The usual, Mom?" Katie said, holding her hot chocolate with a smile. Melissa looked at her curiously. "I've decided to specialize in treating children with particularly difficult illnesses in pediatrics," Katie said, "because I know how those children feel." In her daughter's eyes, Melissa saw an unwavering determination. They had overcome the pain of the past and were now ready to build a better future. Through the cafe window, Melissa watched the sunset and smiled silently. This story didn't end here. A new chapter was about to begin. "Katie, I know you can do it." Mother and daughter held hands. Their fight would continue for a better future in medicine, for a world where the rights of all patients were protected. Outside, a gentle spring breeze blew, announcing the beginning of a new era.